Okay, today is lesson 3.2. It's the second day of lesson 3.2, and thankfully we've gone through enough that we're just reviewing now how to do decomposition. So if I give you a function f of g of x, and I say it's equal to 2x squared plus 3 all over 7, you can take this apart and say, what could g of x have been? And what part would f of x have to be then? And there is multiple answers. So I'll give you an example. If I decide to make any little part of it that includes the x, if I decide to make that part be g of x, then I can pick anything I want as long as I include the x. Okay, I'm going to pick that to be g of x, 2x squared. Now once I've done that, I'm going to have to put this into something, over into f of x, so that it will equal this. So all I do is replace the part I circled there with an x. And I say x plus 3 over 7. And now, this is one of those where you definitely want to check and see, does this, when plugged into this, really equal that? Do you think I've got it right? Good, I did. All I had to do was pick part that had the x. Now, I'd like you to do one like that. Would you please try this one? I'm going to give you a really simple one. I would always start with g of x. Start with the thing that you're going to pull out, and therefore it's the thing that gets plugged into f of x. There is more than one possible answer here. One thing you're not allowed to do is make either of the functions equal to just x. Because if I say this f of x is x, then it's super simple. I just take the original problem and put it here. You're not allowed to do that. You could do that for every single one. There was no effort, yeah. There it even says in the directions, you're not allowed to use the identity function. And that's when it says equals x, that's the identity function. And pause for a second and see if you've got one. There's more than one way. In fact, if you're really good, find me 2 ways that it could work without breaking the rule. Okay, so g of x, you could have just pulled out x. But then, wouldn't I be breaking one of the rules? Yeah, if I pulled out x, then this is back to the original 1 over x plus 7. And that could have worked. You plug this into here, but it breaks that rule that you can't use the identity function as one of your functions. So therefore, I'm going to next pick the next logical choice, which is that. Okay, so then I'm going to say x minus 7 is my g of x, and my f of x must be 1 over x. That's going to be the number one way that everybody's going to say. Raise your hand if you had that one. Okay, good. Did anybody think of a creative way to do it that would not break the rules and yet give me a second way that would work? Yes, sir. Okay, tell me what you think. Okay. Ooh, I like it. Because x to the negative first is the same as 1 over x, and yet it's different than it was last time. I like it a lot. Anybody else have an idea? Yes, sir. Okay, hold on. For f of x, 1 over 2x minus 7. G of x is 1/2 x. All right, I'm going to double check this and see if it actually works. So when I drop this into this, I end up with 1 over x minus 7. Man, there's a lot of smart people in here. Very nice. Okay, so what if it was x is in 2 spots? Actually, let's keep it simpler and say that. Here's my f of g of x, which, by the way, they like to not call f of g of x. They like to call it like p of x. Fine. It's still a compositional function. And a lot of times I get this question. Can I just say that f of x is going to be x squared plus 3, and g of x is going to be x squared plus 7, and then just say that I want to call it f of x over g of x? No, you can't do that because this has to be a function in a function. That's what a compositional function is. This is just two functions being divided. That's not a function in a function. So you could not do that. All right, so this isn't, don't think this is like rocket science. It just adds a little twist to what you were doing before. See if you can do it again. Figure out g of x. If we want a challenge, find another way. I can think of two ways to do this one. Raise your hand if you got a way. It's only half the class. All right, I'm guessing maybe 3/4. But the fact that there's x's in two spots is freaking some people out. All right, so let's put them out of their misery. It's really not that bad. Raise your hand if you think you're confident that yours would work. Mr. Rye? X squared, ooh, plus 1, did you say? That's not what I expected, but it can work. Okay, then what's f of x going to be? Nice. Because when you put this function into this spot and that spot, you'd end up with x squared plus 3 on top, and you end up with x squared plus 7 on the bottom. It works. I think we started with the unusual answer. There's an easier way. Did you have any comments on this way first? Do you have a thought on this? Yes? Nope. This x is going to disappear. You know, it turns into an empty spot, and we drop in the function into those spots. Otherwise, all the other ones wouldn't have worked either. It's an empty spot, so you're dropping it into that spot, and so that worked. Does anybody have a way that they think is probably the easier and more people probably thought of? Yes, sir. Isn't that the identity function? No, so that's legal. I can do that. Yep. How many of you had that way? I expected that way more often. Okay, good. All right. But you know what? There's not a better way. There's just different ways. As long as yours actually works, you know, take this, put it into an empty spot where x would be, and then put it also into this other spot where x would be. As long as you get this to come out, then your way's okay. That is called decomposition. Because composition is where you're putting one into the other. Decomposition is where you're breaking them back apart again. Okay, so let's look at the actual homework on this and see if you're actually prepared for it. The homework on this was starting right here. And some kids asked me in last class, it was a good question, do we have to do, for tonight's homework, all the problems that we skipped yesterday? Like I said, you could skip this, skip this. No, this isn't one of those assignments. Tonight, we're just doing, starting on this purple page, the rest of the homework. Okay, so the ones that we did last night and had you skip certain problems, those remain skips. Of course, you can always go back and do them if you want extra practice. That's the kind of thing where that'd be the perfect thing to do to prepare for your test. You know, go back and do ones we skipped because you haven't ever done them before, and there's answers posted for them and everything. So that'd be a good way to get extra practice problems if you want. Okay. On that note, I would say we probably don't need to do quite this many. So I'll have you skip a few of these. Why don't you skip these two? That'll leave them for later if you want to use them for practice problems before the test. And why don't we skip number 39 also? Although that's a good challenging one. I'm going to have you skip number 35. Skip 35. Okay, so let's start this page. H of G of F of X. Woo. Every one of those little O's means like of. That's the way I would think of it. So this is H of G of F of X. All right, so what do I start with? F of X. You start on the inside. What is F of X? Gotta have good eyes. This is really small. F of X is negative 2x. So I'm putting a negative 2x right there. Now it's G of negative 2x. G is this one. So it's the square root of negative 2x. So this becomes H of the square root of negative 2x. All right, and then the last step is H of that weird thing. So I stick that weird thing, square root of negative 2x, into the H function, which is just an absolute value. So that it's just absolute value of the square root of negative 2x. Now let me ask you something. Since what's inside is a square root, is there any reason for those absolute values? Can the square root ever come out negative? No. It's going to always come out positive, isn't it? So you have to do the absolute value of it. Isn't that going to mean pretty much the same thing? So yeah. If you really wanted to think deeply on this one, you could just drop those absolute values and leave it as square root of negative 2x. I know some of you are thinking, well, you can put in negatives in there. Yeah, you can, but if you don't put in a negative, the thing function just crashes. If you do put in a negative, it works. So if it was going to come out with a negative, it would have crashed before it ever hit the absolute value. So, all right. Now this just rearranges the order. So number 28 will be similar. Number 31. P of X is that, and it says write as a composition of two or more non-identity functions. This is the decomp part, the part we were just doing a minute ago. Okay? So here's your P of X, which I would like you to think all of these are like F of G of X. Act like they gave you F of G of X on all of these, and I would call the inside function always G of X, and I always call the other one F of X. That'll keep your life a lot simpler. So we just did practice on these. You should be good at all of them. So for instance, G of X in this case could be just the 2x if you want it to be. Okay, so G of X is 2x. I pull that out, and then I'd replace this with a big X. So then it's X plus 3 in parentheses to the third. There's more than one way to do those. The decomposition can be done in many ways. All right, moving on to this 41 and 42. Those are, again, decomposition. So this one actually stretches you a little bit, and you're smarter. You put in a B in here. See if you can figure it out. A problem that's truly worthy of you should not be something you can figure out in 10 seconds. So think it through. See if you can figure it out. All right, now moving on to this page. These are tremendously easy. It's like the assignment should be done in reverse order. You usually start with the easy ones, right? So number 44 is super simple. F of G of 3. It's so much simpler because I just need to figure out G of 3, and it'll be a number instead of a variable. You know, the ones we started with, they had variables in them. So F of G of 3, I start with G of 3. Well, that's G, so I'm in here. G of 3 means I must be in that one right there. And then can you tell that the answer to that comes out to 2? Does that make sense? G of 3 is 2. That's what I'm looking for. I already had the 3 part, so I needed to know the other part, which is 2. So this turns out to be 2. Now it's F of 2. And you do the same idea, except you go up to the f function and you find out where, did I tell you x or y when I drop the 2 in there? I told you the x is 2. So then I want to know what the y is. And that's all you have to figure out. And again, there's a couple little more challenging ones later in that. In 56 through 61, you're asked to do it with a picture this time. Again, if they did this, they told me f of g of 1. Did they tell me an x or did they tell me a y when they told me this 1? They told me an x. That tells me that x is 1. So if I go over here to x is 1, that's right here. I follow it up. What's the y? 2. So when I find this spot right there, that's the spot 1, 2. So 1, 2. So when I'm given g of 1, they told me x is 1, and they want to know what the y is. It's 2. So this g of 1 equals 2. Now it's f of 2. Okay, so this is the same idea except with graphs. And the very last page involves words. Oh, scary. But I've found that so many times it just boils down to an equation, and they've told you an equation, and then they've told you something to stick into the equation. I think you'll find so often that ends up being the case. Not saying that it's always super simple, but here they give me a big old equation, and they did give me a little limitation between 0 and 4. Time has to be between 0 and 4. Okay, so then find an expression for the revenue per hour, R, as a function of X. So R of X. All right, this is the one problem that goes back to that Sasquatch problem that we skipped the other day. So I want to talk about it for just a minute, and then we'll be done for today. Miss R, could you shut the door right there, please? Herd of antelope are coming past. Okay. The revenue. I actually would like to go back to the other problem because it spells it out much more clearly. You know what? I'm going to do that for you on Monday. I'm not going to cloud this because we're down to like only 10 minutes, 12 minutes left. And I'd rather have you just be able to finish your assignment in peace today instead of teaching for the last 12 minutes and having no work time. So I will talk about that Sasquatch and the revenue and that stuff later. So that means I'm going to allow you to skip number 63. And that's all I have for you for today.